Waters podcast, where Mainers tell their stories, unfiltered.
Good morning, Maine. I got it right that time. Normally in the morning, I'm still saying good afternoon because we usually do these in the afternoon. But good morning, Maine. Thank you for watching the Muddy Waters podcast. I am your host, Chuck Ellis, and we exist, as I feel like I always say, to help the people of Maine better understand what's going on in our state by bringing in different voices from around the state who are involved, and they can tell you from their perspective what's really happening. Unfortunately, the mainstream media, even here in Maine, is far too focused on what's going on in Washington, D.C., rather than what's going on in your backyard. And one of the things we'll talk about today is something that you probably know very, very little about, because I also know very little about it, and that's county politics. But yeah, everybody wants you so focused on what's going on in Washington so that you don't know what's going on in your backyard. And so, we try to highlight what's really going on around the state, especially the things that the mainstream media doesn't want to cover. And so we're fortunate today to have with us as our guest, Honorable Lisa Keim. Thank you for joining us, Lisa.
Good morning. It's good to be with you.
Yeah, it's funny. Like I think we met. What was it? A couple years ago when you were trying to come up with one of the concerns that I think we would say that we might still have for the Republican Party is one of this thing called messaging, right? And I think that's one of the places we met was when you had kind of led a team of people to try and think about how we can more effectively get out our message here in Maine. So I've been thinking about I was like, I gotta get Lisa on the podcast at some point. And then recently, I think you friended me on Facebook, and I was like, oh yeah, I need to. So here we are. So thank you for coming on.
Facebook just kind of gives you those suggestions, and I saw your name pop up, and I'm like, wow, we're not even friends. But also, I'm hardly ever on social media, so that's partly why too. So I'm not just thinking of those things. But yeah, I'm glad we're doing this. And yes, thank you for your work. We did have a really great team of people thinking about messaging and identifying some gaps in the way that the Republican Party is speaking to the people in Maine. Like I've always been very Maine focused in what the things that I do. And we definitely identified some gaps, and there's still work to be done there.
Yeah, I definitely think there is. One of the things that I've been thinking a lot about, and we as I said off the podcast, I don't want to spend too much time going into like this the national politics issue or foreign politics. But one of the things that's kind of been weighing on me in this directly relates to messaging and how we're being seen by younger generations in particular. Is like the interview that Tucker did with Nick Fuentes, which is a very interesting, conversation. But one of the things that if you dig into what's going on, not just in that interview, but also with, I think it's Nayland Haley, who he also interviewed, is that like, when Republicans do win right now, we're not winning so much because we're presenting a better path forward, but because we're not as bad as the other side. And it's a very low bar to achieve. And so we're still, I think, failing to say what it is that we're actually for, rather than saying what we're against, which is the Democrats and their agenda. I think we need to present a much better picture forward of like what it is that we're for. I know that Vivek last year was saying the same thing leading up to the 2024 election. He was, talking a lot about how, how we need this better vision. He wrote a book called Truths, and I think that was his better vision. I still think more work needs to be done there. But it's interesting that we spent all that time last year, and I think I made it to like 2 or 3 of the meetings. And we as a party still have not done as much as we need to do. And by party, that means everybody, everybody at every level, not just, for instance, Jason Savage at the Maine, the executive director of the Maine GOP, or Jim Dearman, the chair, but like everybody at every level, candidates. Really, one of the things we learned with Trump, in my opinion, is that candidates actually do a lot more to carry messaging than quote unquote the party. Go ahead,
yeah,
Sarah.
absolutely do. We need to, and we do need to take responsibility for messaging When we think that someone else is handling it, that means really no one is. And candidates, especially at the local level, which where I have the experience with, is they don't have a lot of support and help on crafting messaging and creating that. And it is really important because then they become the face for all of us in the Republican Party. And it's important. It's really important that we make sure we understand what our values are and then present them in a way that people can identify with. Right? It's I do believe a lot of what our values are, people in general agree with, but we don't often present them in a way that can identify themselves with that value. And with what happened recently, I view sort of this Trump and takeover that, some people call a mandate, which, you and I just discussed. We, before the podcast, we don't really agree with that. But I see it more as a pendulum swing. I think America, the people are looking for peace and they're looking for prosperity. And the mayhem that is really everywhere, just exploding in America, is absolutely goes against how people want to live their lives. They don't want discord. They want to live, they want to take care of their families, they want to focus on what's important, and they want the government to do the government business and not to be creating so much conflict that it's disrupting their lives. And that's, I think a lot of our foreign enemies are feeding into that, and the general public isn't aware, but still there's just this pendulum swing that happens where people are purposefully course correcting, and we do it as a whole without, each individual is doing their own thing, but as a whole, I believe the voters try to course correct our nation. And that's what I think we saw. And if we don't, as a Republican Party, give them the course correction they're looking for, then they will let us know, and we'll be headed down another path. So it's an important moment for Republicans to get it right. And, peace and prosperity is really something that we don't hear the Republicans recognizing that what's wanted. And of course, Trump is not a peaceful sort of talker.
Well, he's not necessarily a peaceful talker. He does bring peace around the world in a lot of ways. Like he's been, I think he was the only president that didn't start like in a long time that didn't start a new war in a number, or a new conflict. And he has brought about peace that way. But yes, in the way in which he talks about, the other side here in the States, I think, he's not lowering the temperature, so to speak, here. And I think, his defenders would say that like it's the media, they're primarily the ones pushing this, but there is a reality. And I think that's true, by the way. I think that 98% of it actually is the media and how they position him, similar to how they treated LePage when he was governor here. They take some things out of context. One of the differences, though, I think, is LePage wasn't trying to LePage was just honestly being himself. Whereas Trump, I think, is actually intentionally leaning into this stuff. And so that's where the other 2%, maybe you could increase that amount, is him intentionally goading them, right? Like the AI stuff where he has like his Trump 2028 hat on, knowing full well that he can't run again for president, but just knowing that that's just going to freak them out. While I think it's hilarious, by the way, I don't know that it's helping to improve the situation here in the United States.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It would be, we need to take down the temperature for sure, and remember that we're all one. There are liars that are seeking to destroy our nation, but in general, the way to build us back is to try to build common ground again. And it's hard to do that when people from both sides are throwing the grenades.
Well, it's also like really hard to do that, I think. And I do want to get into like our normal thing of where we kind of talk about where you've come from, how you got involved in politics. But this is a great conversation too. But as one of the challenges to finding common ground is when one side is saying that white people are automatically racist and we're going to trans children. And the parents, you better not get in the way. We're not going to tell you about it, and you better not complain about that. If you come to school board meetings, we're going to set the FBI on you. Things like that. I mean, that's not necessarily happening here in Maine, but like nationally, that was. But like similar types of things where I was actually communicating. They had this bill that they had presented. I don't think it got out of committee, if I'm not mistaken, but that was going to try to restrict crisis pregnancy centers from being able to speak. Like it was, I think it would have been challenged in court and they would have lost at the Supreme Court, but they were literally going to say that they couldn't speak about certain things, which is obviously an obvious infringement on free speech. And I messaged my representative, who I've run against twice, and I don't think she likes me that much, but I do occasionally reach out because I'm exasperated. I'm like, this is going to do no good. However, and I was basically like, don't you understand that, like, first of all, like, this is a free speech issue, and this is an infringement on free speech. But additionally, if you pass this, right, and it goes through and it becomes law, what happens when the Republicans take office and we decide that we want to, limit free speech in some other way? There's this danger of escalation that is a real threat to our country. And are you just like ignoring that reality? And anyway, all she did was basically try to defend the position. That's anytime I've reached out to her, like, it's basically all Democrat speaking points, and there's no like, I hear where you're coming from, I totally understand, there are some concerns, nothing like that. Just these are the Democrat speaking points, which makes it challenging. So with issues like that, it definitely, like, you served. I mean, you were there, you were helping, you were trying to negotiate these types of things and watching them get passed. So maybe you have something to share, but like, how do we see them and not see them as enemies, if that makes sense, the people who are pushing those agendas?
Yeah, so it seems to me now, and this is a little bit being more removed now from what's happening sort of under the dome in Augusta, and just kind of looking nationally. But it just seems like the issue is never the issue, that now it's just about creating this the sides, right? The oppressor and the oppressed. So whatever issue can be used to create civil discord amongst American people, that's what seems to be happening. Whatever the talking points can be used, whatever issue can be used to create division, that honestly is one of my big concerns happening all across our nation. But the concern is that it's not just out there, it's in our own communities. And when I first got into politics, it wasn't that way. We weren't, there wasn't so much divisiveness. There wasn't just a look to always create division, no matter what the issue was. And I really see that as a problem now. And it's bringing about the violence that we're seeing, the increased threats that I had even at the end of my term, right? I served for 8 years. At the beginning, I put my personal address out there and all of my contact information, because we were living in different times. To circle back to, what you wanted to start with is how I got into politics. But, I started in 2009, really never, I wasn't a Republican. I didn't become a Republican actually for many years later. But what happened in 2009 was people's veto on marriage. And that actually was what brought politics into my sphere. I am a strong supporter of families. I see that families are foundational to our communities, which are foundational, of course, to our nation. And families are nation builders. And I have a strong religious belief that marriage is between a man and a woman, but also, practically speaking, the purpose of marriage is to build a family and to build a strong family. And so redefining that, I saw as undercutting the fabric of our nation. And I got involved. I became sort of a regional coordinator, and I was homeschooling at the time. I had my kids making yard signs. We were like doing all this stuff, handing out pamphlets. We had phone banks at our house, and my kids were phone banking, and it was it was my first foray into anything. And then we won, and I thought, well, good, I'm done with that. And I just went on with my life and never considered politics again until 2012. Someone asked me to run for House, and I was like, what do you mean you want me to run for House? And had zero clue even what that really meant or anything. So I did end up running. I lost. It was 2012. It was the Obama wave, but I lost by very little against the three-term incumbent. And so in hindsight now, I know like how politics works, and I know why I got on the radar in 2009, and I know why I was on the radar again for 2016, because I worked my butt off. I knocked every single door in my district. I mean, and then in a year which went very strongly against Republicans, I was in Harris breath. So in 2016, when the gentleman that was running for my seat became ill and he had to step back, I was to fill in. So I was a fill-in candidate, jumping into a Senate race. Again, three-term incumbent, really not great odds when you're starting in, I think I started mid-July for the November election. And, but once I said yes, whenever I say yes, I'm 100% in. And so I was all in. It was my, 7-day a week, 24/7, job. And my family kicked in and lots of support. And my kids were great. Just, it's a really dynamic move to have your children go out knocking doors for you.
I went knocking doors with a friend of mine's son who was, I think, 13 at the time. And it is a very good way to keep them civil.
Yeah.
People are much less likely to get really nasty and rude if there are children present. And it's a good learning opportunity for the kids as well. Yeah.
Oh, it's and most people recognize that even now. But I will say, at the time in 2016, it was still a different era. My very first night, I think that my very first day I ever went out knocking doors, I was going up to a door, and this man pops around the corner and he's entirely nude. And I was like, oh my gosh, what am I doing here? Why am I doing this? And he picks up the plant pot, and I'm like running the other direction, put my pamphlet down, just said, sorry to bother you, and ran off. But in 2016, it was a different time. Things were.
I can't even wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I've had people agree that, in their underwear, but never anybody naked.
Oh yeah. I had the underwear one. I actually had a woman chase me with a massive butcher knife, chase me out the door. And I say things were different then, and they were, but every once in a while, there's a crackpot up. And I had a driver that day, thankfully, and I jumped in the car and I said, drive.
Wow. Yeah. My most extreme thing that happened was this last election cycle, when I think I was going to grab $5 contributions to hit my my next level, because I ran clean this last time. And I went to this door that was supposed to be a Republican door. And what comes down and opens the door is a young girl who's had top surgery and is shirtless. And she thought her dad had come to the door. And that was just anyway. But yeah, so interesting times going to the doors, finding people naked, running away. Okay.
Yeah, it can be. Yeah, people have no idea. They look at legislators and they just there's a bit of glamour to being a legislator, being the lawmaker or whatever. But when you look at the daily grind that goes into it, and hours on end, even my knuckles were sore, just because I'm knocking door after door after door, and you're exhausted, and the amount of work which the people deserve, right? I always thought they deserve to know who I am if I'm going to ask them for my vote. And so as much as possible, I always try to put myself out there and say, here's who I am. Like, you should know me, right? If if I'm going to ask for your trust. But yeah, it was something. But 8 years in the Senate, running for office every 2 years is a lot. And then, like I said, the temperature has changed dramatically from that time. When I was first in office, LePage was governor. We had a majority in the Senate as Republicans, and there was a majority of Democrats in the House. So we had divided government, and those, politically speaking, experience in the state house, those were the best 2 years. There was a lot of discord, there was a lot of craziness and mayhem, of course, like there always is. But divided government really keeps people in check and makes sure that the voices are heard. And even though you can't maybe drive home all the changes you want, you are moving at a slow pace, and you're always considering the people a little more, because the parties have less power. I learned a lot. And I also learned pretty quickly when the tables turned that actually the Democrats didn't really actually like me or care about me all that much in general. But I had some very good friends. Some of my, good friends from that time actually were Democrats. So it was good. It was a good time. But divided government has a lot to offer the people. Having strong
Maybe
leaders that will work together.
Maybe in state politics, I think divided government nationally means only bad things happen.
Or I don't know. Like,
all right now it's nothing. I mean, technically, they say, going back to the some of the mandate stuff or whatever, but they say that like the Republicans control the House and the Senate and the presidency. Therefore, it's everything's on us. But the reality is, like, like even if there's a slight majority in the House, like there are a bunch of individuals and some of them will easily cross. I mean, we could very easily be in a situation where even though we have a Republican quote unquote control of the House, we could have a Democrat Speaker of the House. Like that is actually a possibility, like they do in Texas, right, where just a few conservatives change sides. And so like this like it's really difficult to get things through. And in the Senate, like we have so many moderates and I would say deep state hacks, like Mitch McConnell and Lindsey Graham, who are not representative of the people, but they're owned by these, the military industrial complex, et cetera. So here in the state, I think a divided government makes sense. Nationally, I think, I don't know, we got to figure out how to like get 98% of those people out of out of there, but that's a whole nother story. That's a like, I don't know. I feel like hopeful about being able to accomplish things locally. Nationally, I feel like it's a little bit more challenging. The challenges are just monstrous when you deal with like a 37 or 38 or whatever it is $1 trillion in debt, and a $2 trillion national annual deficit, which just means best case scenario, it's increasing, again, by $2 trillion every single year, unless we can figure out how to reverse that trend. Democrats tend to come into power and increase spending and increase taxation. Republicans come into power and reduce taxation and don't decrease spending significantly. And so it's this challenge. I mean, anyway, but in Maine anyway, a divided government, it makes it so that they have to compromise, right? Which is how our founders, I think, wanted it. Which is why, like here in the state of Maine, they're supposed to get a 2/3 majority budget, which ensures that unless you have a super majority, you're supposed to like still get bipartisan support for budgets, which unfortunately has not been happening for a while.
Yeah, that is a really great point. And most people don't realize why that safeguard is in place, but really everything boils down to money. If you don't move forward real policy and real changes that impact the people, unless it almost always it's tied to money. And so to have that safeguard in there to say that this budget, the impact of this on the people really should have a 2/3 vote, because every voice matters in this, because it's so consequential to the people of Maine. And the Democrats have done away with that so often that I can't imagine that when the Republicans get in power, they aren't going to do the same thing. And it's really a disservice to the people of Maine that we have done away with that. I mean, it's same reason why I am thankful that the Senate won't do away with filibuster. I believe, the nationally, because we need to protect the voice of the minority. There should be an ability for people to be heard, even if they don't have the majority. And we have done away with that in Maine. So again, in 2017 and 18, when we had divided government, it was a different time. And things were gentler in politics all around. And, obviously building up to this time, but things were different. And so we were able to accomplish some, definitely maybe not as much as we needed, but the people were heard, and that was good. It's very different, when you think about federally, of course, you're talking about how things don't get done. And I think part of it is it's so difficult for any one member to even understand the atrocity of our government. And so they don't know how to attack it. How do you get your arms around this to know what is right to change? Because it's so intricate, they don't know even where to begin. And when you peel back layers of government, that's why the larger government grows, the less it's efficient and doing a good job for us, because people don't understand the layers. And the legislators who we've put there for oversight really can't have oversight, because they don't even understand what's going on. And we're creating that on the state level as well. We just keep growing government. We get more and more programs and more people working for the government. Legislators have less ability for oversight. And then when you ratchet that back to local government, which I know, you've said many times how important it is for people to get involved in their local government. Well, that's where it's small enough that you can get your arms around it. You really know what's going on. And so you can keep better tabs and make sure that you're fulfilling the oversight role that you should have as an elected official.
It's much more possible, but I would even say, like, at the town level, I got an email from somebody in my town who's relatively new to the area, but he's an engineer, and so he likes the fine details. And I think it's the school budget is like a 500-page document. And I don't even think that's an exaggeration. It's either 409 or 509 pages. I think it's like 509 pages in Westbrook. And it's like, look, I don't know how you're creating that kind of a budget if you're not trying to confuse people. Maybe like we'll just make a selfless plug, shameless plug. There we go. For you're muddying the water there a little bit, right? Like you're intentionally muddying the water. But yeah, so the smaller it is, the more likely it is people are going to have the potential. But you like there are still ways that the people who are elected will use in order to make it feel much more complex and complicated to people, so that they can't be informed in order to be able to effectively understand. And one of the most diabolical things that I think happens in local politics, is when they suggest that any opposition to the school budget is an attack on our children, which is absolutely preposterous and ridiculous. In fact, most of what we're saying is like, education keeps getting worse. Your outcomes keep getting worse, but you're asking for more money, saying more money is going to fix the problem. We give you more money and the outcomes continue to get worse, and somehow we're anti-children. Okay. But anyway.
And I think that a little bit proves the point I was making, is that really our school budgets have become just sort of something that's almost state government, right? Because we're so run by all the state regulations and all the state. And so it's this like just mass of regulations that we're trying to finance this and that, and not knowing, we're so hampered in our ability to be able to make the changes that we see need to happen on the local level. And it was really never meant to be. Our education system is completely against the way it is designed to be. It's supposed to be run at the local level. And until we can divorce ourselves from the money, and if we did, we could take our education system back. Each locality could, and just say, yep, we're funding it ourselves. We're not obeying the mandates. We're going to do this. Well, some of them are of course law, but we could do somewhat better. But yeah, I think I think that is the problem. You're right. I wasn't thinking about school budgets when I talked about local, being able to wrap your arms and kind of understand local budgets. But the school budget is so convoluted because of the state really diving in there and making it that. And, a lot of people, friends I have run for school board, and they're just like, they throw up their hands like, we're trying to lower the budget. We can't touch anything. It's just all mandated.
Right, like such as the number of this is I had a friend who was on the school board up until recently, and there are like whether it's what is it, my brain, special ed teachers. I think that's a big part of where some of the mandates are coming in, is that you need a certain number based on all these metrics. And I feel like the system, again, I'm not a parent, people can judge me or whatever, I don't care. It seems like far too many kids are being designated special ed, and I think that there is some sort of a problem there, and I think it's like, but then the state mandates how much you need to spend, how many teachers you need to have based on who's qualifying, and then that's just driving up the cost astronomically, and again, still not producing kids that are ready for the world. Even if you cut out test scores, you still look at like the result. Like if you're working and you hire some of these young kids, you're like, oh my gosh, they are woefully unprepared for life on about 27 different levels, such as even just showing up on time and recognizing that when you show up, you're actually expected to do work. And anyway, there's this a severe problem there.
Overdiagnosing, and I mean, we're also, have been found legally that we're also over, right, on the state level to kids in state care. So
you said over medicating, is that what you were saying?
Over medicating, yes. Yeah. And we've the children in state care have been found to be over medicated as well. So, and as whole children in the US are being overdiagnosed, and certainly in Maine as well. And there's that's a whole another rabbit trail about why that's happening, but
it has nothing to do with money, I imagine, right?
Right, exactly.
Never.
Incentivizing parents in any to get their children diagnosed. We wouldn't be doing that.
I feel like Democrats used to use the phrase "follow the money."
Oh, did they? Interesting.
I feel like they did. I don't think they do anymore, because if
Probably.
they follow the money, they would probably have to change sides.
Yeah.
But anyway, so interesting. So you were involved in the legislature for 8 years. What are some of like your highlights from being there?
Highlights. Well, I mean, I think recently what kind of comes to mind, because it's been in the news so much, is I was one of the prime co-sponsors of Maine's yellow flag law. And that obviously we just passed the red flag law. That was really in response to legislation that was pushing, right, to have some sort of gun control over people that were unstable and showing signs of being unsafe and harmful maybe to themselves or to others. And Maine, we did a really good job on that legislation, and it obviously everyone knows now how well it's working. And so not only passing it, but following it through to the changes as we fine-tuned it, as we made sure that there was mental health providers available to do these assessments, just walking through, seeing where it needed to be adjusted and fine-tuning that law. That's definitely one of the highlights of my time in the Senate. Serving on the Judiciary Committee overall has been really life-changing to me. One of the things I have always known about myself, but maybe didn't have the words to express, or didn't really realize it, is that I am strongly motivated by justice. I want things to be right. I want people to be treated fairly, and I abhor all of the adjectives that they're about justice now, right? Like racial justice and all these things. Justice doesn't need an adjective. Justice should just be blind and equal treatment of everyone, but there should be justice. And so I found that I really loved that work. I used to say that if there was ever a bill in that would take away your constitutional and God-given rights, that bill was headed to judiciary. So, so I liked being there to be a defender of the constitutional rights of people. And again, it just, it brings me back to what I care about. When I talk about strong families, I believe that people having the ability to have personal agency and self-determination and respecting human beings to be able to navigate their lives themselves, that yes, they're going to make mistakes, but overall these people are going to build stronger families and then stronger communities. So when we take away their liberty, we're reducing their ability to be those actors for good and for change and for the forward motion that we need in society. So I deeply enjoyed and felt very called to that work of defending liberty for people, because I saw it as so foundational to what makes a great nation, because great families make a great nation. And so there was a lot of different legislation that kind of tied into that. It sort of walked out the door as we were dealing with privacy legislation, and that's still a topic. It is actually my bill that's still being considered right now, and obviously sponsored by someone else. But to create privacy legislation, I mean, right now everyone knows, like, if you go and you do self-checkout at the grocery store, there's a camera watching you. There's nothing protecting you right now in Maine. People in the state of if you go there and they capture your retina scan or they capture your likeness, there's no law in the state of Maine protecting people right now. Nothing. And it is shocking to me that we haven't moved forward. I understand it's a very difficult piece of law to kind of grapple with, because you want businesses to be able to be successful in the state of Maine, but people have a right to their information, and keeping that. And as technologies advance, we're losing the ability to privacy, and we've done nothing, because there's this stalemate of the Democrats are saying, well, that legislation doesn't go far enough. And I just kept saying, well, we got to start somewhere, right? Because right now we have nothing. And so that's kind of where I walked. So I watched that with interest, because I want to see that legislation move forward. Indigent Legal Services, which is the public defense system. Actually, when I first got into office, that was one of the things that Paul LePage actually brought me into his office and said, this is a really messed up system. You've got to fix it. And then I had a couple Democrat senators actually come up to me and say, yeah, there's a real problem with this system. You need to fix it. Because I was chair of judiciary, and I was like, I don't know anything about this. How am I going to fix it? And so I will say I did start that train of changing what was happening. But I believe the legislature has totally taken the train off the tracks now. And I dislike very much a lot of ways that's sort of taken off and exploded, and rather than just improved. But so there's, I think just so much. And then it was an honor at the end of my legislative career to be the assistant minority leader. Just that confidence placed in me by my colleagues was really special. And I was glad to have served them in that way for my last 2 years, even though, being in such a deep minority was extremely difficult, and politics was very difficult at that point, at the end. And it's worse now, I think, even in the state of.
Yeah, no, it definitely, things seem to be getting worse and worse every year here in Maine in the legislature. But no, that's really a lot of really interesting stuff there. Like the privacy piece is very interesting. And I do want to circle back. I'd intended to circle back sooner, but families, I think supporting families is a real big challenge, I think, for conservatives right now, for a variety of reasons related to the embracing largely nationally in a lot of ways of it seems to me that gay marriage has largely been embraced by the conservative movement nationally. The challenge, why I say that there's a challenge there, is because the nuclear family, when you're talking about the family, like statistically, the nuclear family is one of the most important bedrocks of a healthy society. The data supports it. You can argue with numbers if you want people at home, but like the reality is that it's there, right? And so how do you, like, I think one of the things that the GOP is kind of grappling with is like, how do you not so there are people, obviously many people that are still part of the GOP that are for going back to the historic, we'll say biblical or Judeo-Christian, you could even say, most religions I think would be in agreement on this, but view of marriage. There's a movement to do that, but I think there's a lot of people that are very reluctant to do that because there is a fear of, well, we won in 2024 because of this coalition, right? And so, like, is it advisable to like, are we going to be able to win? For instance, have we already lost the cultural war on this? And in large part, it seems like at the current moment, it feels like we have, right? And so, is there wisdom in like trying to address that? And I think. So I think the question is, how do we, if that's the case, and I think that's the kind of base operating situation that we're currently in, is like, how do we better, support families and support the nuclear family, for instance, without like offending and upsetting people who don't fall into that category. Again, people can like it or dislike it, but the reality is the reality, and the data shows that, again, for a healthy society, we need to support the nuclear family. The Democrats really don't like this. They seem to want more single moms. For some reason, I'm not really sure why, but I think they're so afraid, I think, of the idea of the stigma that would be placed on a single mom if we talked about how important it is to remain married, and that they seem to be promoting single motherhood instead of recognizing that we need to not shame women who have bad husbands that need to escape those challenging situations, because that really does exist. There are some bad men out there. My response, though, is that, like, we need to be harder on, like, it's interesting. I don't know if I talked about this on a podcast or just somewhere else, but like, I feel like the problem isn't that we need to shame women. Obviously, that's ridiculous, but more that we need to shame men who are deadbeats, and we allow them to get away with it societally somehow. I was joking. I think, I don't know. I was just trying to figure out where this was, but I'll just say it. Like, if we could bring back, the chain gang, so to speak. We get these men who are deadbeats that are not taking care of their kids and arrest them, but then put them to work. And the state could could offer them out for services that other people don't want to do, so that they can, rather than the state paying the moms. But either way, we need to do something, because this situation in which we're allowing these deadbeat dads to go around, and then the government is paying the moms and or the kids in the foster care is not sustainable. But anyway.
Yeah. I mean, just to go back, I mean, I think we culturally definitely have moved on from the question of gay marriage, but it still stands. Regardless of that, we need to support the family, and we need to recognize the importance of the family. And like you said, all statistics show, even children, to touch back on school outcomes, children that have a supportive mom and dad do better in life, they do better in school. And so, the government should be top priorities, is to think, how do we make sure that all of our policies and the way that that our government, our country is run, allows families to thrive. And that, if something stands in the way of that, then that's bad for our nation, it's bad for our community. And that's the answer, moving forward with that. But yeah, I think I think so often people try to conflate their religious views with their political party. I certainly do not. I keep them very distinct because who I am as a person obviously influences everything that I believe, but I don't believe that the Republican Party is anywhere near my religion. And so whatever is decided by a party, a political party, has is not bound to my religious beliefs. So I definitely keep those two things distinct, because I know who my savior is, and it's certainly not any Republican.
It's not Donald Trump. I thought, well,
No.
no, he's not the savior, but he's the fourth member of the Trinity, right?
No, definitely.
No. Oh, yeah.
So we,
Okay. Yeah.
county government, we've gone everywhere,
Yeah.
and I think being in county government is really interesting because I've spent so many years talking about theory of smaller government, lower our taxes, and it's theoretical until you get right into actual administration, and then it's the nuts and bolts of governing. And when you're looking right directly in the eyes of someone that you're like, yeah, I want to cut your budget, it is a very different experience than giving a floor speech saying we need smaller government and we need to lower what we're spending. And but county government it's really it's not political, it's really stripped down, really just based, it's essential. So county government handles, it is basically like the town government for any unorganized territories, and there's quite a bit of unorganized territory in Oxford where I serve. So we essentially are in charge of upkeep of the roads and ensuring that they have means of elections and that kind of stuff for unorganized territories. We also have the county jail, and the sheriff's office is under county government. There's deeds, and there's the probate court. In Oxford County, we also have an airport. So really basic government. We did some changes this year in looking at what we're funding, because by statute, county government is only allowed to raise taxes for those services that that impact the county equally. So we aren't allowed to say raise taxes countywide for something that might help one town or one nonprofit that doesn't equally impact the whole county. So that's our mandate as far as the regulation around our ability to tax the people. So it is a very tightly controlled. So we can't just go off and say, well, it'd be nice to start this program because we want to help, XYZ individuals. We aren't allowed to do that. So that really constrains county government and makes sure that we don't kind of get off into any of the political avenues that happens at state government. So it remains very focused on just serving the basic needs of the county on a county-wide basis, and stays. And I joke and say that the switch is like, going from the mayhem of the state house to like going county government is like watching the grass grow now, because it's just it's a slow pace. We had one meeting where we talked about dumpsters, where they're placed, how often they should be emptied, 3 different times in a day. And I thought, wow, okay, we're talking about dumpsters. And it just, it makes me laugh because it really is, it's administration. But yet it's important, and it's important to be fiscally responsible and to know where the dollars are going that you bring in, and make sure you're applying them properly. And I think in some ways it's good, the news recently, just that county government has been bringing on, but the fact that Washington County is is bankrupt.
Yeah.
That's shocking, right?
Yeah. How did they do that?
How did they do that? It's a matter of not keeping careful records. Just because there's money in the bank doesn't mean that it is not allocated to something, right? And that's kind of,
Yeah.
And when you borrow from a certain pocket of money to pay something because it's due, but that's that you shifting the money around, that's obviously how it happened. And they didn't have good accounting practices in the county, keeping track of where their money was going. And they did it for so long that they ended up completely upside down. But how can a government go bankrupt? Because it's the people that they owe. And so
Right.
the very people that they owe this money to, they're going to say, sorry, we took your money. We said we would pay you for these services. Now we're going bankrupt. I mean, I don't know how that's possible in any sense. But it's very eye-opening for me to watch what's happening in Washington County, but also to consider the enormous responsibility to be careful with the taxpayer dollars and make sure that there's accountability and transparency. One of the very first things I did when I became Oxford County Commissioner is institute video recordings of all of our meetings. So now you can join live, you can watch us live, and every single meeting is now online, and you can listen and to anything, to see how decisions were made, to see what decisions were made, what sort of information went into it. And there's a very good record now. There's a video record of what is happening. And for me, that was so important because most people don't have access. We have our meeting lasts all day long and they're at work and they don't have access to that. And I want to make sure that people have access to government and that there's always transparency. So that was one of the first things I did as a commissioner. And people are slowly becoming aware of it, but already it's paying off good dividends because even we ourselves know, hey, we talked about this at X meeting. Let's go back and make sure, that what we heard is what we thought we heard. And so we even can check for ourselves what's been discussed and make sure that we have it accurate in our memory.
Yeah, no, that's obviously really important. It's kind of hard to imagine. It's hard to imagine why in the in the 21st century at this point these things wouldn't be recorded because of like how easy it is to do that, right? Like I'm so obviously very appreciative of people who are like, hey, let's do this. Like, I mean, it makes sense, as you said, for a lot of reasons. Like when it's recorded, you can easily go and grab the transcript, you can throw it into AI and you can say, give me a bullet point of what happened in this meeting. I sometimes do that for my podcast to like create like a post or something like that. It's really easy for people to be able to understand what's going on. If you guys haven't started adopted AI, I highly recommend it. At this point, you got to stay competitive, but it is, you don't want it to think for you. You still have to use your own brain and go back and be like, okay, what was it really? Is that really what was said? But it's a good, it can save a lot of time is the short version, and it's not always right. So be careful with that. But
yeah, amazing tool. One of the things we're looking at right now in Oxford County is to there's been a recent proposal by the sheriffs of Franklin, Androscoggin, and Oxford. The three of them got together and proposed that we create a regional jail. And I have a lot of questions around what would that look like? What are the costs? What considerations should we have? And so there's a feasibility study that's been suggested, and it cost us $120 to do the feasibility study. And I'm saying, wait a minute, before we spend $120,000 for a feasibility study, why don't we ask some basic questions ourselves first? And so I spent a portion of yesterday actually using AI, and I've created quite an amazing document in hours of just looking at jail capacity across the state, the cost that would be to us if we were to build a new jail, and breaking it down per inmate, based on our bond rate, and all of this information that I would never be able to pull together myself in such a short amount of time. I can use AI. And like you said, I now have to run all that information through the proper channels and make sure that it's accurate. But it's a baseline to start with that's phenomenal. And definitely in government, and people everywhere, just, I guess, I get that it's scary. I get that there's so many ways that this can be used against us in the future. And I'm nervous of all that as well. But in the moment, we also have to say it's here to stay, and we might as well use it.
Yeah, like one thing I'll say, AI that becomes conscious and tries to destroy humanity is called science fiction. Sorry, it will not exist in the real world. God is the author of life. He gives sentience, and he's not going to give sentience. Well, I don't know. I'm not going to tell him what he's going to do, but I do not believe that he is going to give sentience to machines. Machines can break. And yeah, so machines can break, but like we're not going to get there. But yeah, it's a tool, and we have to use it. And it does save so much time. And so anyway, so we do have a question from, we'll call it from the audience, we'll say, and it has to do with the yellow flag laws that you kind of had mentioned, which, it's interesting when you were saying that, like, as a conservative, so there are a lot of people who would look at yellow flag laws and say that they themselves are an infringement on the Second Amendment. And also there is the argument that's kind of being presented that the yellow flag laws created a pathway, or could have theoretically created a pathway for red flag laws. And just wanted to know what your thoughts were, about that. I didn't prepare you for this question. I didn't know it was going to come, but like, I also didn't know that you had worked on the yellow flag laws, because I'm still, I'm in my infancy in Maine politics. I feel like I've been paying attention really aggressively, really more since like late 2021. I was more nationally focused before that. I decided that I was going to run for office in late 2021, but I still wasn't, I was like, I don't know, Senate or House. I don't even know like what's going on in Maine. I knew about 5 different people maybe from around the state, if that were in like House or Senate. And I knew that giving emergency powers to the chancellor was a bad idea, and I knew that we had done that. Obviously that's a Star Wars reference, in case you're wondering. But what we did for Mills, I was like, that does not sound good. I've seen Star Wars, but so I didn't really know so I didn't know again. But I was just curious about your response to to that, because like part of me, like obviously we need wise governance in our state, and I do think like people who are in difficult situations, there are questions like with mental health and mental illness, there are concerns about them having a gun, kind of thing. But there's also the argument that like, well, who gets to define whether or not somebody's mentally ill? I mean, given the way that Democrats write ballot questions, I could imagine them defining conservatives as being mentally ill. So, so I have, for that reason, I have concerns even with something like a yellow flag law. But what are your thoughts there?
I mean, one of the reasons why we had with this legislation a Democrat and a Republican both sort of being the front runners to is because both sides hated what we were doing. And so I got a lot of pushback from my own side on favoring this, and for being in favor of it. So just to say, does this pave the way for red flag? It doesn't, because there's red flag in many states in the United States, and yellow flag, Maine is the only one. And there was red flag laws prior to this. But really,
in Maine, there were red flag laws in Maine prior to this, or no, nationally? But there's no trend that shows that yellow flag laws lead to red flag laws.
No, there's no trend, because the yellow flag is the only.
Oh, we were the only one that had ever done it.
We are the only state in the nation that has this law. So there's nothing that would point to the fact that it leads to anything else. In fact, it really should have quelled the red flag law at all, which is why even Governor Mills came out in opposition to it, because we had a system that's so much more robust and so much better while protecting people's freedoms. And that's where I just really people have to understand what this process is, because it's not in the case of like red flag where any person just fills out an affidavit and gives it to the judge, and the judge has just on this one person say so to make a decision. Yellow flag is a process. It's someone going to law enforcement and saying, I see that there could be an issue with this person. Here's what I'm seeing. Here's the evidence I have. And then law enforcement looks at what they're saying, right? Does that preliminary investigation of that information first, and then says, yes, I agree. I see something here. And then goes out to meet with the person themselves and says, hey, it looks like you're having some issues here. How about we get you a mental health evaluation, right? And this law has been used over 1,000 times to stop people from committing suicide. Like, it's really effective. So then law enforcement takes this person to get a mental health evaluation, and then a mental health professional will diagnose and say, yes, this person is going to be a danger to themselves or others. They are exhibiting these signs of some sort of mental distress. So it isn't to say that they have a major diagnosis. It is more just, in this moment there's a signs of mental health distress that's going to lead to injuring themselves or others. And then all of that information is then taken to a judge, and a judge will then allow a weapons restriction to be placed on that person. It is a difficult process to walk through, like a time-consuming process, and there's a lot of checks and balances built in. And so that's why for a while it had a hard time getting off the ground, because law enforcement had to be very engaged in this. They had to be trained in it. And there's a lot more involved in it than just simply someone walking into a courtroom and making a judge have a decision without any evidence at all. So there's a lot of evidence. So we're not getting to the point of having a judge put a weapons restriction order on a person until they've already been reported first by someone who's close to them, investigated at least preliminarily by law enforcement, then had a mental health evaluation. All of that information then is brought to a judge, and the judge will say, yes, I agree, there's a likelihood here, and they do the weapons restriction. Or they say, no, even with all this you've brought me, I do not see this as plausible, and I'm not going to grant the weapons restriction order. So it's an incredibly robust system. Anyone can report another person to law enforcement and say, even if they see something from social media, maybe they're a family member and they're saying, gosh, they're talking about suicide all the time, or you could be a classmate, hearing someone, make threats, and just, be fearful and say, I think this is credible, and go to law enforcement. It utilizes people's natural action of, like, calling 911 if there's a problem, and rather than relying on someone, very something that would be very unnatural to us. If we thought someone was imminent danger to themselves or others, the last thing we would do is say, gosh, where is a courthouse around here? And I wonder if they're open. Hey, it's a holiday. No, they're not. But that's not what you do. You don't think, oh, there's an imminent threat. I think I need to go to the courthouse and fill out an affidavit to make sure this person's weapons are taken away. No. In that moment, you call 911 and you say, hey, there's something bad that could happen, and this person is dangerous. Please come take care of this situation. And so yellow flag it considers people's natural reactions. It uses a system that we already have, with adding in that piece of mental health evaluation, and really comes out focused on the person, because it's not about a weapon, it's about the person. Are they dangerous? And if so, they need help. And people don't get help when you just walk into their house and take their weapons away and don't have any conversation with them, have no prior interaction with them at all. Just walk in and say, I have a warrant, take away all your guns. What have you done? You've just actually you've added gas to the fire, because if that person is dangerous in any way or on the edge of some sort of mental health breakdown, you've just instigated them further in that moment. So that's why law enforcement came out of flag. It creates danger for the people and for the person themselves, and it does nothing about the situation of person. And unfortunately, we lost that I believe that if Maine people better understood that we already had a weapons restriction, because that's, you know, how the question started, right? Do you want Maine to have a weapons restriction order? Maine already does have one. Judges and courts can already take away weapons if it's necessary. So it was misleading. And I believe if people understood better the system we already had in Maine, they would not have wanted this, because it isn't just another way. It's a more confusing way, in a way.
Yeah, I'm very disappointed in the Maine voters over this. I'm very disappointed in gun rights activists for not getting out and voting it down, and many others. The red flag law. Obviously, like, I think there was some confusion in the chat, but like, you're not in favor of the red flag law. You're making arguments for why the yellow flag law made sense, as it's not taking anything away from anybody. It's saying, hey, somebody's a potential risk. Let's get the police involved. Let's do an investigation. If necessary, let's bring in mental health experts to be able to see if there's potential risk to them doing harm to themselves or to others. And
The yellow flag gives
due process.
Your constitutional rights are not removed until you've had due process. And that's exactly opposite from how red flag is, and I'm entirely opposed to red flag, and always have been.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think the argument, again, some people I think are making the argument, and I'm just going to move on from this question, but that having the yellow flag law led to the red flag law. And I think that, first of all, anybody who's making that argument, I think they're kind of, I don't think that's a reality. I think what led to red flag law is that we have a bunch of crazy liberals and we had a shooting in Maine. I don't think if there hadn't been a red flag law, I still think that they would have hadn't been a yellow flag law. I still 100% think that they would have pushed for a red flag law as a result of what was happening, what happened in Lewiston. So I think that's
legislation introduced in the legislature every year I served.
Yeah. So, it's something, but again, regardless, maybe it would have passed the legislature, wouldn't have even had to go to if the yellow flag hadn't been there. Maybe the red flag passes the legislature, but more importantly, the way that the ballot question, that type of stuff works, I think that that's what determined that red flag is now law, not the yellow flag. I don't think I understand generally. One of the things that I will say is I'm a logical guy. I love logical fallacies and I actually love logical truth, but I also love understanding logical fallacies. And many people, in determining what they believe to be true, they actually accept fallacies. So for instance, when we get into issues transgender treatment of minors and stuff like that, they have the appeal to authority. Well, all of the medical experts say that this is blah, blah, blah. What's interesting in the state of Maine is there's a legal requirement for the medical experts to affirm care in that situation. So that's a poor reasoning. But in addition, the appeal to authority is a logical fallacy. It's not true. One of the logical fallacies, though, that I do find in many cases to prove to be true in reality is the slippery slope. There are a number of different categories where we could go into with this. I would say, from where I sit at this moment, I don't think that the yellow flag in this case was a slippery slope to a red flag. I think the red flag was something that the Democrats, either the voters or the legislature, would have pushed. It's actually possible and probably likely that the fact that the yellow flag was on the books held the legislature back from itself passing a red flag law. Would you agree with that assessment?
They still tried to pass red flag every single year, and honestly,
it didn't stop them.
Yeah. No, it was the fact that Janet Mills had always said she would veto it, the reason that it never got off the ground. But it definitely was. There was a need to address what was happening. I mean, at the time this passed, that was when we'd had the school shootings, and there was indications that these people, before they went in and shot up our school children, there was indications that they were unhinged and they needed to have something happen, to stop them from what they were doing. But because they hadn't yet done it, right? Like to know that someone is going to have, there's got to be a way to address that as well as just after the fact. So for their own protection and for others. So there is a need for this type of ability to act, but it has to be done with due process.
Interesting. I think for the reasons described earlier, I am more in favor of not having yellow flag laws and stuff like that. But I understand where you're coming from and whatnot, and appreciate you kind of sharing the thought process and all that. Again, I didn't intend to go into too much detail on this, but we had some good questions, and I feel like it was a good conversation. Yeah, so there's that. But moving on, my brain just shut off. It does that sometimes. Comments in the chat get my brain going in different directions, and I've got to bring myself back. But yeah, so I definitely think that if we're gonna, I would personally, because of my concerns about who's in charge and how they're designated mental illness and stuff like that, in order to protect people's rights, I'm more in favor of not having this type of legislation. But I definitely prefer yellow to red. let's say that. And it's very disappointing. We had a Lieutenant Michael Johnston gave 40 minutes of testimony, 45 maybe, on why red flag laws are bad. And it was right out there. I made sure to publicize it, and I took clips from it and pushed it out there. And I don't know what else I could have done outside of maybe raising $1 million to be able to push that out even further to get people to realize the risks and the concerns that are associated and the violation of due process. My hope is that this will be challenged in the courts and that it will fail, but we'll see what happens there. But either way, appreciate you taking the time to come on. I appreciate you serving, and even I think you didn't highlight this. You mentioned it before we came on, but do you say that you think you're the first or the only female county commissioner?
I am the first woman to serve as an Oxford County Commissioner. Yeah, so that's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
And it is women and men think differently, and so it definitely changes things up a bit. It's been fun.
Nice. Well, I appreciate you, serving in the legislature. You kind of highlighted this earlier, but people. I get frustrated because I don't think empathy is the most important thing in the history of the world. I do think it is important to think about what other people go through. And like being in the legislature is one of the most thankless things that you could do. Any level of government in the state, maybe county is a little bit less onerous than, school board or city council or the legislature. You can tell me, but it seems like the legislature is this, like, you literally, I was there when they were doing the boys and girls sports thing. I gave testimony, and I think they were there until after midnight. I know with some of the other things, they can be there after midnight, and nobody seems to care all that much. They're just mad that the Republicans didn't stop the Democrats, who have complete control from accomplishing things. And it's just like, okay, what can they do? And so you guys go there. You at least were there when it was divided, or when we had, I think you were in when we had control, or not. You didn't get in until after we lost control, right?
Exactly. So we lost the House. When I got in, we had the Senate and the governorship, but we had lost the House.
Yeah. So we never had control while you were there, so you could never do whatever you wanted. But better than it has been since 2018, where we've been in the minority in everywhere, it's really challenging. And you were in for a lot of that, so it's really challenging to be able to accomplish anything, and people just are mad at you because you're not doing anything. And it's like, well, we can't, what can we do when we don't have the majority? And anyway, so I'm very appreciative of people who are willing to go and serve and spend all of that time and get browbeat and get all the negative press and things like that, just to try and help serve their state. Not everybody who goes there for selfish selfless, I should say, reasons. But I appreciate people who take the time and serve. And I think that you're on the side that does it for you. You are selfless. I'm going to say that. I don't know you that well, but I have reason to believe, we'll say, that there's no ulterior motives here. So thank you for your service. What are you going to do next? You running for Angus King's seat in 2030?
Quite enough people running as a Republican for governor, so maybe I'll just throw my hat in the ring there.
We need at least a baker's dozen, right?
Well, no, at this point, so why not, right?
Yeah.
I'm county commissioner for at least 3 more years, and that's a good gig for me. That, and I have 2 grandchildren, and I spend a good deal of time with them. So that makes me very happy. I like having the time to enjoy the sweetest things in life.
Yeah, well, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much again for coming on and for everything that you do and have done in the past. And we'll look to connect, I think, hopefully again in the future. And and everybody. This will be the last podcast I do before Thanksgiving, so everybody have a happy Thanksgiving. I don't think they could hear you when you just said that.
Oh, happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah. So everybody have a happy Thanksgiving. You too, Lisa, and thanks so much. And we'll see you all here. I'll be back on next Monday, I believe, and we'll go from there. All right. And